So come play with us in the new year. So if you haven't met our dear friend Chris before, he has a master in psychology and he's a master level trainer in non-violent crisis intervention, clinical director of the Provincial Networking Group, and also a psychology professor with the Northwest Community College and been working in the field for 25 years. So lots of experience. He managed one of the most successful supportive employment in BC over 18 years and regularly asked to teach and mentor in the area of specialized employment services for people with disabilities. He recently became the first person in Canada to receive the Certified Employment Support Professional designation from the USA-based accreditation body APSC. So we congratulate him in that. And Chris joined the Douglas College team as an instructor in the new Advanced Certificate program. And I know he'll talk to us a little more about that. So welcome, Chris. It is a joy to work with you. Next, we have dear Christine Buchanan, and you'll see she's the Director of Performance Management and Quality Assurance. And Chris has a long service with mental health and with employment, working in the field for 15 years, serving people with multiple barriers and persons with disabilities. Chris has 12 years of employment with the Open Door Group. If you're not familiar with that service, please just give it a Google. An amazing service in Vancouver and with branches elsewhere. And with that organization, she's offered 6 years working as a director level of supervision of service delivery, procedures and deliverables, performance evaluation, training adults, quality assurance and program design. So a myriad of administrative expertise there. And in addition, Christine also has 6 years working directly with people receiving employment services in the intake, in assessment, in case management, workshop facilitation, job development, and follow-up. So here we see she just has a full gamut of experience. So with that, we are going to hand you over to our two presenters. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll just take a little moment to get our lecture slides up.
Okay, welcome everybody. Looking at our presentation today for engagement and discovery, I have the slide on my screen, the cover slide that has the BC Psychosocial Rehab Advanced Practice logo, and Christine and myself up at the top. So hopefully everybody can see that all right. Going through the session today, we'll be looking at splitting up the duties so you get to sort of bounce back between listening to myself and listening to Christine. And we'll probably also have our cameras on, so hopefully you can also see us as we're speaking. And if there's not too big of a delay, then you won't be confused with the sound of our voice and our lips moving. I think it's working quite well the last time. So welcome. Today I'm coming from broadcasting to you from Terrace, BC, which is in the northwest corner of the province, in that area of Prince Rupert and Kitimat, which you've probably been hearing about, for all of some of the economic activity that's going on up here. And Christine is joining us from the Lower Mainland. And so just to go through the engagement and discovery goals for today, and looking at the objectives, and I put 4 on there. First of all, looking at, let me just see here. Oh, somebody's getting a double shot of Chris talking. All right, maybe we can have one of those disappear. That is probably our, oh, okay. I remember this from last week. If people are hearing an echo, sometimes that also is because you've signed in twice, and so you might want to just click out one if you see your name twice in the attendees list, and that should solve that problem, hopefully. Now, looking at the objectives for today and the 4 main ones that we hope to cover as we go through this session. First of all, looking at how some of the strategies from the engagement and discovery process in the disability field could also work in the mental health field. And as Regina was mentioning about sort of bringing together 2 areas of work, being the disability or developmental disability world and the mental health world. And both areas have been working in this world of employment, and so each with some slightly different strategies, some common strategies, and so we wanted to look at how we can sort of merge those together and take those best practices from each to helping with the people we're supporting. The second objective, looking at examples of how important engagement is on the part of individuals living with mental health issues when they're thinking about employment. And just that whole idea of engaging the person and bringing them in and why that's so important to this process. The third objective is to identify ways to use strength-based assessment information to support job development activities. Even if you hadn't already been involved with employment specifically on behalf of the folks that you're supporting, it's very likely in your field of work that you are already conducting or going through some types of assessment processes. So strengths-based assessments are used in many areas of service provision, and so just looking at how we can use some of that good information that people are already gathering to help support this idea of employment for folks. And then finally, reviewing ways to keep a person living with mental health issues engaged and actively involved, especially in those initial stages of employment, which are really so crucial. If you've been involved with helping somebody going through or beginning on this process of looking for a job, it can be very stressful in itself. And so finding some really good ways to engage them and keep them active and involved so that they don't run into that situation where they start one or two meetings and then they don't return, or they lose interest or sort of fall off in that process. All right, so I'm going to start off first of all with just looking at a question for everyone. And the question, two questions. The first one that I'll start off with, and Christine will jump in for the second one. The first question is, how many of you have been involved in supporting someone with a mental illness to become employed? And I'm just going to see if we can pull up this poll feature. So if people can see that on their slide, if you click on the yes or the no, it should tabulate automatically for us. And so many people are clicking. It's a rapid fire poll, and we're seeing that a large majority of you have had some involvement already in the employment process for people that you're supporting, and there are a few that haven't. And so depending on the level of involvement that you've had, there's a good chance that you're going to be seeing or hearing
Sorry about that, folks. We just lost Chris's sound for a second on the switch. I'm not sure if that...
Hi there, it's Christine. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I can't hear you. No. So I'll go on to the second poll question. How many people have used specialized, customized techniques with clients with mental health versus more of the traditional methods? And I'm not sure if we've got the poll up on this one. Let's see. Nope, that's not the poll. Yeah. No, it's not there. Okay.
Sorry, Christine, I'll
We do.
fill the poll for you real quick.
Okay. So I'm Christine Buchanan, and I'm very happy to be doing this with Chris and with Douglas College, as well as the Psychosocial Rehabilitation Advanced Practice webinars. And so our next question that we're going to be asking is in relation to specialized, customized techniques that you have used and versus traditional methods. So maybe let's put the question on how many have used the specialized, customized techniques for helping somebody with mental health find work. And that will just give us an idea of, where everybody is at. That's great. So we're seeing 72, 80%. Okay. So we've got about 8% saying that they have, and 20% saying that they have not. So let's see if I can bring it back to the lecture. Okay, and we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, and the reason that we decided to put this slide in here was in relation to a lot of the customized employment training that is out within the United States, and the training that has been happening is a lot to do with people with developmental disabilities. And the question that comes up to me a lot within my organization and when we're doing customized employment training is how does this work with people with mental health conditions? And I would say, along with the psychosocial rehabilitation principles and discovery, they go hand in hand. It's a perfect match. And you can see here, we just listed the developmental disabilities and individuals with mental health, how it works perfectly. Discovery activities, they involve that person-centered, strength-based planning. It involves the person directly. They are the center. They're the person that decides and leads how this is going to go. Their supports, and you're using multiple different formats that gather the information. So it's not in an office back and forth. You're out in many different environments.
Okay, thanks. Now looking at the differences, and when we talk about differences, it might just mean that you you take a different approach, you take a slightly different angle, or maybe you spend a bit more time, or you use a few other tools from your toolboxes to enter into this discovery process with somebody with mental health issues. So one of the areas that might be slightly different would be around the relationship building right at the very beginning. And so when people are coming in with the idea of looking at employment, you might go at it a little bit slower in some cases, just to really build that relationship up, or just to get the person comfortable and used to the idea and the process. It may take a few times just to sort of introduce what's different about a specialized or customized or supported approach to employment versus traditional employment. Sometimes you need to go through some examples with people. We have a couple of visual sort of timelines or maps that we'll share with you in a bit, but also managing expectations and responsibilities. So how do the roles play out between the support person and the individual or the job seeker, as we often refer to the folks we're supporting? and talking about how people have shared responsibilities and how those roles are going to play out. Sometimes we found that folks with mental health issues that came into our employment program, they were able to or interested in taking on more of the expectations or responsibilities, wanting to go at it a bit more independently perhaps, and as opposed to having the support person right there, which is great. And then we would be maybe more meeting in the background behind the scenes in a debriefing sort of way. And so another area that might be a little bit different is around disability management or wellness plans. And so in the world of mental health services, these are tools that many of you are probably familiar with, and we'll talk a little bit more about them and a couple of models specifically around disability management plans or wellness recovery action plans, for example. These are tools in the mental health field that can help to identify a number of areas like triggers and early warning signs, plans or interventions, helpful people. And so those types of tools or wellness plans could be really key right at the very start of the employment process in order to ensure that your work together is going to be productive. Working with disclosure or non-disclosure around employers and around the person's mental health issues, that can be a big issue, and it can be a difference between the disability community, for example, and the mental health community. A lot of times with the mental health issues being more invisible disabilities as opposed to somebody who has a developmental disability, for example, like Down syndrome, where it's more visible and there's not that issue to the same degree of disclosure or non-disclosure. And so that can be a bit different area between these two groups. Working with multidisciplinary teams, that's one thing that we noticed in our agency. We always try to, we call it cast a wide net and include as many supportive people as we can in the job development process. But when we started working with people with mental health issues, we realized in our previous roles working in the disability community, we hadn't always considered bringing in psychiatrist or therapist or a counselor or a physician into the process. And in fact, when we look at folks with mental health issues, those individuals, that really multidisciplinary team can be really important. And so there are a larger team or different roles, but that can be in the two groups. And also discovery activities, they're similar. However, the method of communication may not need to be augmented as much for someone, or as it is for someone with a developmental disability. And so just as an example of that, in our work, working with people with developmental disability, often use augmentative communication, lots of visuals, alternate forms of communicating with each other. And that might not be as necessary. You might be able to rely more on traditional methods of communication, text and things like that, with somebody with mental health issues. All right, the next slide.
Thank you, Chris. So for the next few slides, we're going to talk about engagement and discovery. So to consider how some of the strategies from engagement and the discovery process in the disability field could also work extremely well in the mental health field. So we're going to cover off three main points: the frequency, the regular and engaging meetings that you will have, having a very clear process and timeline, and then also taking the holistic view. So we'll go to the next slide where we'll talk about the frequent and regular and engaging meetings. So the purpose is to build that rapport and to learn as much about the individual as possible. So within with whatever methods that you're doing with it, maybe it starts out in the office and then you're going out into the community to meet with the person, and building up about why you would want to be looking at, say, more non-traditional approaches to finding employment, and having the meetings be as flexible. So the time, the location, and the focus, and then looking at the specific areas of the person Can they get up early in the morning? In relationship to the medication that they're taking, where are they really drowsy in the morning? Is it hard to get up? So all of these things that you're doing are taking an effect to how it will be when they're employed. So are they, maybe you'll have some meetings that are happening in the morning to kind of see, can they make it on time? Is it hard? Are they able to function thoroughly and easily on the tasks that you're doing, and change it over to the afternoon where you're doing it at different times? And then also looking at different locations. So if the person indicates that they can work in a busy environment or they need a quiet environment, what is that to them? How would they define busy? And then go into an environment such as that. And then having most of the meetings, for us, all of the meetings are at the office except at maybe the very first one, possibly. And having them in very different environments. So they're in a safe environment. It could be their home if they're open or welcome to that. It may be in a coffee shop or a community center that they're very comfortable in. And then also having the appointments in unknown environments. And then explaining the process of that. Why is that happening? And then having activity-based type of activities in the community. And we'll talk a bit more about that, like work simulations that we'll be doing. It might be activities in relation to the type of work that they're looking for, or work simulations. And then having a very, very wide focus that you're looking to pull out all of their interests to really get an idea of what their personal themes are for the type of work that you're looking for. And in the next 2 slides, Chris is going to talk about 2 different case studies that he's got to that really pulls out on this piece. So thank you.
Yeah, we have the wide focus is really is a great tool that we use, where we really try to get to some of those interests and preferences and skills and that sort of thing that the person likes, that they might not come out as clearly on a traditional employment interview kind of focus, where you're asking specifically more about like work skills or things that seem to be directly connected to employment and working. And in this case, we're actually trying to engage them through other things that aren't necessarily directly, at first thought, they don't seem like they're directly related to employment. So it might be just things that they're interested in general. What kinds of things catch their attention? What things do they do when they're bored, when they're just trying to relax? What are some of their favorite things? And even if they don't seem to have a direct employment connection at the moment, it's surprising how many great nuggets of information you can end up learning about somebody just by really keeping that wide focus as you're having those initial meetings with them. One of the sort of gurus in the field for us that we often look up to is a lady named Denise Bissonnette, and many of you may have heard of her. She's originally from the States, but she's now living in Canada, and she is a wonderful speaker on non-traditional job development. And we love her material simply because she's really good at coming up with some of these interesting, creative questions and homework assignments or activities that you can do when you're meeting with people to keep them engaged. Even things like, I'm just thinking of some of the questions I remember her talking about, which is if you could be famous for something, world famous for something, what would it be? If you were an actor in a movie, what kind of role would you play? And so just really thinking very interestingly in a wide focus like that. 2 things that I wanted to bring up just as an examples that staff in our office have been able to do. This is Marty, and he was just starting off in the discovery process with a young lady with mental health issues, and they were just sort of in that get-to-know stage. And she had a lot of issues around anxiety, and so he was starting to talk to her about, what kinds of hobbies does she do? Sometimes our hobbies are what help us to relax and to be calm. And so she started to talk about this one hobby that she had. And at first she seemed a little bit shy or apprehensive about bringing it up because she didn't know if it was really relevant to work-related stuff. But Marty sort of prompted her along, and it turns out that she had a real talent and interest in making robots, and she would construct robot models specifically using recycled materials. And so everything that was made that robot was constructed with was made up from recycled parts that she would then repurpose. She would paint, she would trim them up or alter them a little bit and turn them into these very creative robots. And so as Marty started talking with her more about this, he really learned that this was indeed one of her strategies, or one of the things that she had in her life that helped her to sort of remain calm and stay relaxed and deal with things that were going on around her. So Marty actually came up with the idea and said, hey, would you, because she talked about how she would make these and she usually just give them away to friends or family. And so he asked her if she would consider making a robot for our office. And she seemed quite excited about that, and it took her over a period of a couple of weeks. And so each time that Marty would meet with her, they would have an update about how's the robot coming along, and just talking about that process and why it works for her. What is it about that helps her? And so he was able to identify through that process some really key areas that he could then watch for or use when it came to looking for potential work placements. And so we ended up getting a really cool robot out of the deal, and it was quite popular with our staff. They would take it from office to office. Then we had a competition where we had the Name That Robot competition, and so we had this lady was involved in all of that, and so she got a lot of positive reinforcement out of the whole deal. And the robot, the name ended up being Electrifying Alice. And so she has now a featured spot in our office, and so I stole her for the office for today. So this is Electrifying Alice, and she's our robot mascot. But it was a really neat way that Marty was able to engage with this young lady and help her to feel more relaxed, and also identify some things that were helpful when they did start the job development process. The other story is sort of a similar idea, but a little bit different focus. Was one of our other employment coordinators, Mark. He's a musical kind of guy, and he had his office, and everybody in our building gets to sort of decorate, design their offices the way that they like, paint color, accessories on the wall, things like that. And so Mark actually had a guitar or two hanging in his office on the walls, and because he was very musical and into guitars. And so he was starting to meet with one fellow who was very withdrawn. He was very depressed. He wanted to find work, but he'd been out of work for many years due to an acquired brain injury. And that had really taken a toll on his sort of self-esteem and morale, and he was really at a low spot when he came in. And so Mark was trying to find ways to engage him and draw him out and have him answer questions and provide input, and he was having a hard time with that. And one day the fellow noticed the guitar on Mark's wall, and that started to open the door to a conversation. And they found out that before his accident, this fellow actually played in a band. And it was quite a huge hobby for him. And even though he still kept up his playing just for himself, he didn't perform publicly anymore. And so that ended up opening up the door where Mark pulled the guitar off the wall, and he ended up without an amp. It was an electric guitar, so they just started strumming on it. He got this fellow to play a few licks on the guitar, and then the very next meeting they set up so that he would actually bring his guitar in, and they both had their guitars, and they had a bit of a jam session, and they found that just opened up the door for conversation. This fellow was more comfortable, more relaxed, and as he was playing the guitar, he was able to talk more about preferences, about job opportunities and things like that. So it really sort of was that thing, that catch, that engaging point that was able to help Mark be able to pull this fellow out and get some great information for the job development. So those are just two examples of sort of how how sometimes the engagement process, it might be something very unusual. So keeping a very open mind to what is it that you might be able to use to help engage this person in the process a little bit better. Looking at having a clear process and timeline is the next section, and having a clear process and timeline we found has been very important for people because we sometimes see this as a slightly non-traditional or different path when we're looking at specialized or customized or supported types of employment. We need to make sure that progress is being made. We need to make sure that people aren't sort of stagnating, that they're not getting stuck in one of the early steps and not making progress. We also need to make sure that we're not going too quickly where we're skipping steps, and that can cause people to be very anxious if they walk in and at that first meeting they're already looking at sort of the job placement very quickly. It can start to have them be a bit panicky. And so we found that when we can really explain and show that we have a very clear process and timeline that will be progressive, it'll be step by step, and we'll always be able to know where we're at on that process, it really helps to alleviate some of that anxiety and nervousness from people. And they can see that there is actually a plan and how they get to their objective, which is ultimately to be employed. So making sure that you have a clear process and timeline, you can communicate that to the person right at the beginning so that they understand. I mean, one of the potential things that we've had happen before is where people come into our agency not aware of the process. They just see employment on our window, and they come in and at the first meeting, they're just like, okay, I'm here, I want a job. And they're sort of expecting that they're going to come in and see that job board on our wall where they just pluck one off of the wall and they go off to work. And so we need to be able to explain to them that we actually go through a process, those steps. That is the end goal, but here's how it works. Outline the shared responsibility. This is a really great time to do that when you're talking about the process, to make sure that they realize that it is a shared responsibility, that both of us are going to be involved. As the job seeker, they're going to be playing an active role in obtaining their employment. And so it's not just going to be up to the employment counselor. And some of you, if you've been through this process before, working with people to help find them a job, if that shared responsibility isn't very clearly articulated right at the front, you might have the situation where the person is either coming in or phoning and saying to you, have you got me a job yet? Have you got me a job yet? And so then that's kind of showing that they're thinking that you're going to be doing all of the work in the process. So that shared responsibility is important. Letting the individual know the process will the realistic and manageable pace. Go at it as they're ready. If put more time on one part, but it's going to be we'll need to follow an order in order time. We don't want to skip steps so that we're testing their confidence and comfort point through the process, as if we need to spend for taking that next step, and show the individual where they've accomplished so far. That can be a big course when you're looking at the ultimate goal, and if it's going to take before that happens, we don't want to hope and to be discouraged. So even we want to make sure that we shine on this process. We want that they are making progress. They have a call. This is great, and being able to help them to see that even though that is coming, stuck in this pre kind of area. So when we process and timeline for visual for people, use this visual, and so this was the employment service sort of map. 4 steps, and then employment in the different agencies will have to share the one that they use.
Thank you. We found that very much with the customized employment and with the discovery phase on up to employment, that it was very clear to have the process, and we called it like managing the expectations. And it wasn't just managing the expectations of the person that you're doing the discovery with, but also their support. So the multidisciplinary team, their family, so that they fully understand what is involved, and then also understand how they can help and assist along the way. And so for us, it was very important. I'm going to see, like, maybe I can draw, maybe play around with this piece here to kind of show you the key areas, like this part here with the discovery piece. No, it's not drawing. Let's play here, there. Okay, the discovery piece, getting really clear what the outline is, what's involved in the discovery, how long it's going to take, what type of activities that may happen. And then all of these pieces, when you're creating the profile, their employment plan, their representation profile, all of that portfolio may take a little bit more time. So they wanted to see it enlarged on the screen. Can they do that? Click on this full screen. Okay, perfect. How's that? Is that better? I can't see any comments, but we'll go through. So you've got here, so you've got like the discovery piece, and we're saying 4 to 8 weeks, 5 to 20 hours, and it depends on the person, it depends on their goals, it depends on how that goes. We were doing an analysis. I just was wanting to get a picture because this question came up a lot. You know, how long between when they start discovery to when they get employment? And I would see the discovery would go between 1 month to 3 months. Sometimes there were longer, where it took a lot longer to complete discovery, and usually it was because of life circumstances intervening, which are also very, very important, because you see how the person is able to handle the cope and then getting right back into the flow. And then also, I'll talk more from once discovery is done and then you're into placement, how long that takes. And we would see, it would depend also, of course, on the person, between 1 and we would say 6 months, you know, and I would see on average for us, it's about 3 or 4 months. And so this part really is key, and getting it very clear for the person that you're helping find the work, as well as the supports, as I mentioned here. And then in this area right here, we do a commitment plan. Also for the supports, is if the person is getting up in the morning, helping with hygiene, helping, you know, to getting to the appointments, if they're going to be doing that for helping with the placement, to start that early and then looking at that. And then in another area is right here, once it hits into the job development piece, is again revisiting the map, revisiting the timeframes, revisiting the commitments. And then when we do the three-way meetings with the job developer and with the vocational counselor, the client, the supports, and we're going through all of the pieces and then talking about the check-in points, talking about what will be involved. And like Chris had mentioned before, really talking about the responsibilities that the job seeker has, the person has, in what they will be doing. And we've done in the past, that's been very successful, are mini job clubs, where they would be coming together and working at exactly at the level that they can work at, but it's a getting together, peer support, working together, meeting with the job developer. That helps with the meeting points where you're able to meet with them, get them on track to stay on activities that they're doing, and able to have the job developer out in the community. So this again was another one, also with the supports in letting them know. Then another area was here, once the job occurred, revisiting it again with the supports, if they're needed to help the person get to the job, to help with the clothing on time, hygiene, all of those pieces, that we discussed that again. We would say that these are the areas where there could be falling down, or the the support's not following through. So you want to know right away. If it doesn't happen over here in the discovery part, the likelihood of it not happening over here is higher. So if you can see that it does occur over here, then it's better later on. So I'm just going to minimize this, and we'll talk a bit more about when you're doing like the work simulations, the work experience, the that happen throughout here, or they could also happen here. Okay, so I'm going to minimize.
We also had a good question about the idea of place and train and rapid placements, and those does this fit with that? And my understanding of the idea of the place and train and rapid placement concepts are that they don't want people to get stuck. They don't want people to get stuck waiting to be ready, and that whole concept of readiness can be very problematic if it comes to somebody trying to decide if an individual is ready yet for the next step. And so we want to make sure that these maps, that this process flows along on a reasonable time frame. And so in the past, you might have situations where the person was, they would get stuck in those early stages because somebody was deciding that or assessing that they weren't yet ready for the next phase. So I think that when we think about rapid placement, the term rapid or the timeline that equals could be different from person to person, and I think the intention is that they don't get sort of waiting to be ready for the next step, that we make sure that they're progressing along. And so I think that it would fit in those terms, in that if it takes 3 months or 6 months, or even in some cases longer than that, the wheels are still turning, and they're not just waiting for the next step, so to speak.
Yes, and sometimes it may happen where it's faster, so it's not limited that you have to go through and do, it doesn't have to be the full drawn out 6 weeks, 12 weeks. That's based on individual need. And I've seen, as I've been going through the different case studies and the progress notes and going through at the time frames, that also using the work simulations, the work experience placements, all of those things can also help, to speed that along. That I've seen that the placements come a lot quicker for us. So hopefully that's answered your question, and we'll pass it over to Chris.
Okay, thanks. So looking at taking a holistic view is the next section. And in our agency, when we try to look at this discovery and engagement process and taking a holistic view, we end up forming what we call a discovery story at the end of this process. So it's basically the summary of everything that we've learned with this person through this initial intake, discovery, engaging process. And so it's sort of a framework. It's not a checklist. It's not written in stone. It's very flexible, because what can happen sometimes is if you give people a checklist of intake questions or things to do, people will just stick to that checklist, and they almost become bound by that checklist. And so then that's where it can really limit things, because we want to allow people, our employment staff, we want them to be able to push sort of the boundaries and to be able to really ask different questions and venture into other areas, so that they can learn those great nuggets of information that they might not just get from a traditional sort of formal checklist. And so this holistic view really means that we cast this very wide net in our work with the person to try to learn as much as we can about them. There are a couple other more formalized tools that you'll sometimes hear about. One that we've also used around our employment initiatives is called the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And so the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, or WRAP, it's an actual tool that has six specific areas, and it can help the person to identify sort of their daily routines, triggers, events or triggers that they might need to watch for, what some of the early warning signs are that their mental health might be coming into jeopardy, some signs that things are breaking down, and what the crisis plan is if that happens, and also post sort of crisis plans afterwards. How do we learn as we go through this process? And so all of those points that are covered in that wellness recovery action plan can be very helpful for employment activities, because of course as an employment support person, those are things you're going to want to know. You're going to want to be able to know what some of those early triggers are, and in order so that when you're working with the person, if you notice them, you can also sort of start looking at kicking things into action for that person as far as supports go. Be sure to involve other helpful people in the individual support network as part of their initial discovery process, as much as the person will allow you to. And we've always found if you explain to them, what is the reason or the purpose for involving these other people in these initial stages, people are usually fairly cooperative with that, as long as that's all very clear and upfront and you have consent from the person to do that. And so some of those helpful people can really be good at pulling out information, even around skills. Sometimes a person, if you think in your own situation, if we made you come on camera and turn your mic on for the whole group and tell everybody, what are the things you're best at, it can be a bit intimidating, and people are not always as comfortable talking about those things for themselves. Sometimes people that know that individual are more comfortable bringing out some of those points. And identify early potential issues that could impact future employment, such as living situations, medication compliance, addiction issues. All of those parts are important. We want to look at, how we pull out the person's strengths for sure. But we also need to look at issues that we might need to look at building in some accommodations for in the workplace, or having some plans sort of prepared so that when they do come up, if they come up, that we're not caught by surprise. One example that comes to mind for me is that when we were talking with one young man about his employment and why he wants to have a job and what he wants to do. I mean, some of his motivational factors were that he was living in a supported residential program at the time, and he really wanted to move out on his own. And so, of course, he saw employment as a pathway to do that. And so that was it was an interesting tidbit of information, because it's important to know or understand what's motivating the person you're supporting to want to work. That's really important. But it could also be a bit of a red flag, because, and luckily our employment person picked up on this, is that what happens if you get this person put into a brand new job and everything's going well, but within a matter of weeks, they end up moving out onto their own into a brand new unsupported situation. Well, all of a sudden that job is still very new, and now their whole life has changed. And so it's something where in that particular case we actually worked on, talking to him and getting some agreements that, when you get a brand new job, we're probably going to need up to 6 months to really get comfortable with it, make sure that everything is going well. And so having a major life change right in that early stage could be a real challenge. And so we actually talked a lot with him and his supports about really keeping things stable and not jumping too quickly to the moving out situation. And so by taking that holistic view and looking at those overall wellness plans, disability management plans, it can help us as the support people to identify not only the strengths, but some of those things that we might need to look for accommodations for in the future. This is just a link and some information on the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. If you haven't heard of the RAP model before, it was developed by
Great. And in relation to the disability management plan, I brought a sample of one that we use that I can show, or we can talk about it later if you want to know more information, which we found very beneficial. You know, we've Open Door Group's background has been working with mental health since 1976, and in 1998 we went to cross disabilities, and the disability management plan worked very well with all the other disabilities, but I would say with the mental health, where you're working with relapse, you're working with what are the triggers, what are the signs and symptoms that are so critical in the workplace. So we use that a lot with the person that we're working with. And the earlier that you can start to pull that information as you're going through the discovery phase, it really, you're able to see that in action, so that you can see their awareness of it. Do they know what to do and how they can handle that, and then getting all of those supports in place. So we're looking with engagement and discovery, we want to look at some examples of how important that is for people with mental health when they're looking at employment. Some of the areas that we've had where they've had maybe very negative experience with work, perhaps they felt like the work was a major cause for them, and the idea of going back to work could bring up a lot of symptoms and triggers, so that way to talk about that. Also, we've had to work with overcoming the myths about work, that it doesn't mean 9 to 5 anymore, that especially when you're looking at the customized, that it could be 2 days a week, it could be 1 day a week, 4 hours, 2 hours, all of these things as a step back into employment. And then also looking at the misconceptions about it in relation to the job carving and the job creation, which Chris will do in some other webinars, where you're talking about it's not the whole job description, that you could be carving out positions, or you could be creating jobs for the person that's perfect fit. And also you're looking at somebody that may have little employment experience. In the case study that we are going to talk about later, and one that's we work with, we use a lot with our marketing materials, because the person hadn't worked in over 35 years. So there was her last employment was when she was 15. So she became ill, was hospitalized for quite a few of those years, then was getting the supported employment. So to get back into the workforce, or to even think about working, was a little bit of a longer process to kind of break down the capabilities of that, and also to start out with volunteering. So the whole process can seem a little bit overwhelming, and that's where I believe that the discovery process is so much more effective, that you're out in the office, you're out of the office, in the community. And so then you're, the observation, the really listening and watching, how they are in the different environments, and giving that encouragement for them. Because my experience when doing it the old traditional way, where majority of it was in the office, it was very safe. They felt very comfortable, they felt very safe. And then when it became that time to look for work, that was where the stress levels would go up, the anxiety would go up. And so you want to be able to kind of have all of those supports in place before then. So let me move to the next slide. And I kind of talked about that, dealing with a lot of anxiety around the expectations of what employment is. Our biggest area is breaking down the myths. We have a mental health program for leisure. We have rec therapists that do awesome work getting people that have mental health to get connected to the community. And a lot of those clients, I would say 75% of them could work, and they could work in a customized employment area, but it's breaking down the idea of what does an employment look like? What does that job carving look like? And doing workshops on that, so that they feel that this is something that they can take on. And then working on engagement. So it's always, we'll talk a bit more on some other different types of clients in relation to where they're at. So really getting them engaged in the whole process, so that they feel, that it's all about them and where they're at, and that we only step in where it's needed. And so if they can do it up to an X point, then that's where, they will do all of that with the support. And then if it comes to a time where they're not able to engage or they're needing that support, then we step in and guide and support at that point. So the next areas, we've got 2 poll questions that I don't know if we got the polls up. Chris, did we get these ones up, or are we going to ask these questions? So it's the question is in not this one. It's how many people or job seekers that you've had that once they start exactly that point, you're in that planning phase. You've done the discovery, you've got the goal, you're ready to go, and then when that new job or the thought of doing a job searching, that it falls. I mean, for my experience, that was the area where a lot of support was needed.
Yeah, so we don't have the poll question up, but I think that what we can do is we can just look at.
We've got lots of poll questions.
That's working its magic in the background.
Yeah.
And so how many of you have had job seekers that appear to start putting up barriers?
Yeah, it was up for a second.
They appear to start putting up barriers when that reality sets in. That yep, the job is there, and now it's time. They've been on board all along. But now, when it's really down to the crunch time, all of a sudden, there's all kinds of barriers that start to come up. And it looks like there's overwhelming experience in that department from people. And so I think that that's an important question, because it really sort of points to the importance for us to make sure that that person is really engaged in the process, and there is a process, and so that they can feel like each step they're building towards being comfortable and supported in the next step, so that that's less likely that might happen. The next question was around how many people have experienced job seekers that start the process, but they just don't return. And so this is that phenomenon of you have somebody who's come through the door for their first appointment, and you have the first, maybe the second appointment even, but all of a sudden, as things start to get a little bit more involved, now they just disappear and they're not there. And so looking at that question, let me see if that pull up here. Yeah, how many of you have experienced job seekers who start and then don't return? There we are. So just vote on that one if you've had that happen to you. I know that a large number of you from our earlier poll said that you were involved in employment or had been involved, and so I imagine that there's probably lots of you, and the poll so far is showing that there's lots of you that have experience with this phenomenon of people sort of coming but then dropping off the radar. And so it's an interesting thing to consider, because we need to look at, does engagement play a role in that? Is there something that was missing that we can build in that will help to keep them attached, to keep them involved, and keep them sort of motivated in that process? And so this whole topic of engagement is really important when it comes to that area. So thanks for your answers there. Now, Christine is going to tell you, give you an example of looking at meeting the person where they're at in this particular example here.
Thank you. So yes, in relation to what Chris was talking about, and in that discovery, I think when you're doing the appointments out in the office, when you are doing the work experience, we're doing the observations, you're doing, and it's that client's fully engaged, looking at that increases the likelihood of them not falling at that point of when the job start happens, when the pavement, when the tire hits the pavement. I always say that wrong, but that's what I'm where I see that falling down, and I see that the more that you can show them that they can handle this in these types of environments out in the community, it increases. And this person that I'm talking about here was a person that had severe schizophrenia, paranoia, anxiety, and could not take the bus. For him, it was very, very challenging. His parents would drive him, but they wouldn't be able to drive him to all of his places when he finds a job. That was our thing. He could take to the appointments, so we were able to select the times. So the discovery works perfectly because we were able to meet him in his community. The first step that we were doing was kind of to see where he was at, what he was comfortable with. As he was not comfortable with taking the bus, he indicated that he was fine with walking around his neighborhood. So we first gave him a list and said, okay, can you find me 10 areas or companies that you are interested in, that you would like to go to? So the first round, the 10, he came back to the appointment and there was not any. So we narrowed it down to 5, and again talked about why this is important, that if he feels that he's able to go to these places, he's comfortable, then we can kind of find him a place of employment in that area. So then the next appointment, he was able to come, and he had 5 places that he was able to walk to. He knows a bit about them because they're in his community. And so the other appointments that we did out in the community were going to each of these places and meeting. And then once all of that pieces were done, it was also an excellent resource for the job developer. The job developer was able to take those companies and go in and work with them. And he was able to get a job in the place that he was interested in, that he could walk to, and in his community. So we'll go on to the next piece of engagement and discovery. Over to Chris. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Christine. So the body had a good question there about if this idea of engagement is the only reason people dropping off or not coming back, or could it be other factors as well? And certainly it's not the only reason, for sure, because there may be other things going on in the person's life that prevents them from continuing. So that could certainly happen. But I think that in our experience anyways, we saw a lot less of that occurring when we really focused on that being very engaging and involving the person along the way, and doing lots of debriefs as we went through so that they're really involved at each stage. It's not just something that's happening to them, it's something that they're actively participating in. And if they have that comfort with the person, if they're a support person, to be able to bring up if some of those issues are them not returned. Certainly not the only reason, significant one in our experience. Really focused attention, we saw less of people coming back. The next slide talks about, and this was from one of our objectives, strengths-based assessment information, support job development activity of you in your work, even if you're not directly involved in the first sort of line of service. People with mental health, they have assessment processes, and there can be some really good information processes that could help the idea of employment and working to employed.
Hi. So this was an example of an employer who came to us. We've had in quite a few circumstances, you know, where employers walk in and they're saying we want to hire somebody with a disability. And the dark table, if you're not familiar with it, I would highly recommend that you go to this restaurant. And it's dining in the dark. So that is, everybody is visually impaired, that are the servers and the employees. So they came to us and they asked to hire people that had visual impairments. And another example that I wanted to put here, I was going to put it on later, but I think it's another, it totally ties in with this piece. We had another situation and an example where an employer came in and they asked to hire somebody with a disability. They were working with a hardware company, and I had the perfect person that would be to go and work with him. But then in the next breath, he said, and I would like to not have the person have a mental health condition. And so for me at that time, standing there in front of him, doing everything I possibly can to keep my cool and to listen and find out why. And through working with him and finding out his previous negative experience that he had with somebody that was an employee, perhaps that had mental illness. He didn't have a diagnosis to confirm that, but that was his assumption. And then working with him and educating with him about mental health. By the end, he had job coaches on Thursday coming in and working with the teams and bringing in people with mental health. So in that moment of when this occurs, how important it is to keep your cool, I think that would be my biggest thing, and then find out why. And we had excellent placements of people that were working in that area. So although this one doesn't necessarily work with mental health, it just talks about the employers that go out and about in finding creative ways to find employment. So I'm looking and cognizant of the time. We've got 15 minutes.
I love the story about the dark table too, because it a lot of times you'd think that being visually impaired would be an impairment or a roadblock to employment, and so in this case it was actually a prerequisite. All of the servers that work at the dark table restaurant are also visually impaired, so it was a really neat example, I thought. Christine mentioned we are looking at the time here and 15 minutes left, so I'm going to just jump into this next slide here on identifying support networks and helpful people. We've talked about this throughout the webinar this morning, and so often it's not, it's about who we know, and so we need to keep that in mind. I think we know that in our own worlds, that many of us have had experiences where we've gotten jobs based on connections that we had or people that we knew or referrals. Same can apply for the folks that we're supporting, and so make sure that as we're building that discovery piece and we're talking about all of the supportive people in their network, we should also be looking at that through the lens of, you know, what connections might they be able to help with around getting either a work experience, a situational assessment, a referral, a work trial. You know, using those networks and resources can be very helpful. And so then looking at, I'm not going to do the poll question, but just to think to yourself on this, about this question, how many of us in the past have actually had benefits or connections around in the
So then talking about people actively involved in researching activities, looking at the different areas, especially that I talked about earlier, really went out about and looked at the data, and we've used that seeing that they don't need to necessarily do the marketing, we have development pieces for them, engage on what types going into their favorite places that they love, and doing the work simulations and situational assessments. This one very, very key. Chris is going to talk racial assessments. We found really excellent in Kamloops. We worked a garden gate where we have a music community kitchen. We'll make recipes and just to follow and watch and observe, and then see where we're able to go in and see that they're the central person, that we're just their assistant to be able to step in and help them as they need it. And that one I found has been very, very, very helpful. And then it's celebrating the progress. With the researching the activities, we've had in several circumstances where you're working with the ideal conditions of employment. We have a person that we work with, particularly with schizophrenia. His IQ, I'm not exactly sure how high it was. I think it was off the charts. He exceeded all of the academic testings that we were doing at the time, all of the training. He wrote, incredible science articles. So we actually got him in a placement, a work experience placement in doing that. But the stress for him was too much. It wasn't the ideal conditions of employment, even though it was totally up his alley, totally what he could do. It didn't work for him. So we had that he went actually to this hardware store and worked with them. And he was super happy about being able to help and assist. He was extremely knowledgeable and would find out about things in the hardware store to be able to help people. And that worked perfect for him. And then started to write science articles. And there's a question about how much testing we do before job search. That in relation to that particular story, we were doing training. We were doing retail training. We were doing computerized training. So we did prerequisite testing. Now we would do more. All of our assessments when we're doing customized are out in the community. And I was, as I'm going through when we talk about the next case study, and I was reading through all the progress notes of the person that did it, and the wealth of information that they received from being out in the community was far exceeded anything that I would have received from just doing assessments in-house. And Chris, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, just in answer to Doug's question as well, I find that as sort of general rule for our own in-house assessments, we do a lot of the situational assessments, and I have a file you'll be able to download, especially if we don't have as much time to talk about it. But the situational assessments that we do, we'll aim for about 3 specific or different assessments in different workplaces during that sort of job development process. But in some cases, we've had to do as many as 6. Because sometimes you'll find that there's lots of red flags going up, and so we want to do as much assessing as we can to try to identify all of those before they catch us in the real job situation.
They're doing the assessments, not situational assessments. Yes, situational assessments are very valuable. So this is a next case study that we've done that I've talked about briefly throughout the presentation in relation to the person that has not worked in 35 years and working with her. All of the appointments with her were done out in the community in busy environments. She had also in 2004 went into supported housing and started volunteering in 2007. So we had ample observation opportunities where we could go in and see how she worked, and we're able to work with areas that she had challenges with speaking abruptly to customers, dressing, having appropriate clothing for that particular environment. So we were able to address all of that prior to doing the placement pieces, as well as doing the work simulation assessments. And so with this person, she was able to, I'll call her Kay, able to start work immediately. We do have her name on there, good. So it's Carol. And she started work with the Rubens Diner, and it was a job carved position. They were looking for a server. We took all the different duties that the servers were doing that Carol could do and job carved and created a position for her. So she's been working there for a year. And the areas that she needs assistance with, even though she indicated that she could work in a busy environment, it was clear that she, during the really busy times, that she would become the hardest time and become flustered. So we switched the schedule around for her, and doing the job tasks analysis of that, and giving her like the checklist to do. And like Chris had talked about with the checklist, needing to narrow down the checklist because she was adhering to it too much, and that didn't match and flow with the company. So they have been extraordinary. We've been coming in whenever there's a new employee that we on how best to work with Carol and for Carol's communication back and forth. And so I think that's it for me, just considering for time, because we've got 5 minutes on that. Chris, do you want to add in more?
Yeah, this is the last part that I wanted to just bring people's attention to or talk about. It's a tool that we use a lot, and it's called situational assessment. So this would be an assessment that our own staff do, and it's an on-the-job. So it would be thinking of a work experience as an example, where you would set up a work experience in an actual job place, and you would go in with some very specific goals in mind. So the differences between situational assessment and a traditional work experience are that usually they're shorter because of staff resources. We would have anywhere from 1 to 4 hours, and it would be anywhere between 1 to 3 or 4 occasions. And so we might arrange to go into an automotive store, an automotive shop, for 2 afternoons for a couple of hours. Our staff would go with the person. We would have goals developed in advance of things that we'd like to learn about the person on the job. But in almost every case, what our staff would report is that if they went in with 5 specific goals of things they wanted to see in an actual situational assessment, they usually would come back with 15 things that they learned. And so it's really a great tool because the staff is there the whole time doing an assessment and supporting the person. You're able to actually see things as opposed to a work experience where the person just goes and the support or the staff person isn't with them for the duration. And so just to give you more information, there's a couple of documents, files that you'll be able to download from this webinar site. I believe they're already loaded up, and this is one of the documents. This is the situational assessment proposal. It's just a one-page, double-sided tool that our staff have used, where we would take this to an actual business person in order to pitch the idea of having us in to do a situational assessment. These were very easy sells to employers. They were usually very cooperative and helpful. They liked the idea that our staff were there to support, that it was very focused and time limited. And so feel free to use this document, and if you think that it's something that's handy. The other document that is available for you to download has more detail on it, and it has more of a description about the process of the situational assessment, but also it has a whole page of the types of things that you might learn from a situational assessment, just as a guide to get you started. And then you go through it. And then after each one was done, of course, we would sit down with the client, the job seeker, and do a good debrief as to what we learned, what we noticed, how they felt about it, pull out some of those ideal conditions for a future job. And it was just a really fantastic tool. So we would usually aim for doing 3 of these assessments during the course of our involvement, but as I said earlier, sometimes it would be more. Now, looking at just some questions, because we just have a couple of minutes left, I wanted to, I noticed that there was one question that was posted around caseloads, so maybe I can take a stab at that one. It's a challenging one to touch on. I can tell you that our experience with caseloads, it would be anywhere from, for one employment person, it would be anywhere from, say, 12 to 30 people that we would have on our caseloads. I know some people it's much higher than that, but you have to keep in mind that each person isn't going to be at exactly the same location on that map, and so some people are going to have more intensive hours, whereas other people will be more in the maintenance and the job support section, which requires a lot less time. So we always tried to manage our caseloads so that the staff person had people at each of those points across the spectrum in order to just help them manage their time a bit better.
And the question about a job developer. So there are two models that I've seen where it would be the vocational counselor would be doing, I'm going to say vocational counselor, that's our term that we're using, but they would be doing the work from the beginning all the way to the end with the client, and those I've heard the caseload numbers are around 15. For us in our agency, we have vocational counselors that do the discovery piece, and then we have job developers and then job coaches to do the external. And exactly what Chris was saying, depending on if it's developmental disabilities, mental health, the brain injury, the level of functioning and the level of in-depthness that's needed. So it varies. For our vocational counselors, it goes from 20, and we have the job developers again up to about 30, where it's just, and they're also working with other people that aren't within the discovery process. So the range of ability and the range of need and extra support varies with each of them. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add in more and if that helps with that question.
Yeah, we're a much smaller agency, so we had sort of one stop, one person does everything, and so
Okay. Yes.
that's why our cases might have been a bit smaller, or our caseloads may have been a bit smaller.
And we found that we having another person that just did the job developing with employers to do that marketing piece, and then the job developer that works with the client, because that was the maintenance piece and the follow-up that Chris will be talking about in the other webinars, really helped a lot with if the employer calls or the client calls and there's a crisis, so you're able to just jump right in.
So this slide is just pulling your attention to the next webinar, which is January 9th, and that's one that I'll be doing on job finding. And so that one will talk more specifically at the actual job development process. So please feel free to sign up for that one, and thank you very much for everybody for joining us and for the Psychosocial Rehab Advanced Practice for hosting this webinar.
Thank you very much.
So just want to take a moment and say happy holidays to everybody. On the camera here. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We had lots of people with us, approximately 40 people with us this morning. So thank you very much. A big thanks to Chris and Christine. Thank you very much for your expertise and for the collaborative way in which you shared your information. Give us lots of resources, lots of things to think about. So thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. And as always, we encourage you, if you have things you'd like to share. We're planning for 2015, as probably everybody is. And so we have ideas about doing a session on family involvement, on substance use, on maybe having a philosopher's cafe. We'd also maybe thinking about having a open time with some people around questions and answers, what you have on your mind, and some maybe issues that you have, just leaving that. So we have a lot of ideas, but we'd love to hear from you in terms of what would be most useful. Again, thank you, Chris and Christine, and thanks everybody who's with us this morning. Thank you, and happy shopping. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.